Hey everybody, welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial what I'm going to cover is the very basics and crash course of how to make some foliage. In this tutorial I'm going to make some pretty basic grass, and the reason for that is because it's one of the easiest types of foliage to make, especially with one of the tools that I'll be making it with. So, I'm using 3ds Max, and I'm also going to be using Debris Maker for this little tutorial. And the nice thing about Debris Maker is you can make all kinds of stuff, but what we're going to be looking for is we're going to be making grass. I'm also going to make just simple yard grass, and I'm going to tone down the blades to maybe something like 20. And maybe 30 for height. Let's go ahead and generate and see what that gives us. Okay. It's kind of hard to see. So if we go to the front view, turn off the grid, that's kind of what it's going to be baking out as. So what we want to do is select one that has pretty good profile to it. I think this one has the best profile, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the rest, and we're going to have to give some special treatment to this and do a little experimenting to turn it back into an editable poly or mesh, because this will not export correctly out of 3ds Max. Let's go ahead and collapse. See, that's what happens when you collapse. So let's go ahead and try and convert to an editable mesh. Not quite still. Select that. Ah yes, that's right. There's a modifier in this. Should allow us to convert it to a mesh. Okay. Tools. Here we go, tools. What we want to do is click here to mesh. And now what we should have is a mesh. So we select that, deselect that, and now we have a mesh here. This one also needs to do the same thing. So here to mesh. Select that, deselect that. Whoops. Delete that. Sometimes weird things happen with doing this. But ultimately, you know, you can't beat auto-generating grass. Alright, so we can delete the original, and now what we have is a fairly decent grass clump. I would say this is not going to turn out great, so first thing I'm going to do is change the pivot. maybe right down there somewhere. Something like that. Bring it in here. Now it's in a decent place for us to rotate it and get a better shot. Do something like that. I think those are pretty good. Ultimately, still not going to be great. You guys are going to have to experiment with this, but since this is a tutorial, I'm going to move on. First thing we're going to want to do is let's go ahead and attach this to this. Now I have one piece. Let's go ahead and center this. The center, we turn on our grid. Now we have our grass patch. If I have 7, this is 3,000 or 2,500 polys. So they'll come out to like 5,000 triangles. Obviously, this is not realistic for a game. If you're doing a render project, you know, this could definitely be helpful. But ultimately, all we want is something to get a decent bake from. So what we're going to do now is create a plane. Just make sure it's square. So let's just say 20 by 20. Oops. Let's get rid of the segments. And for the sake of readability, let's go ahead and apply a red material to the grass. And let's change this to a gray color. Rotate this 90 degrees. Let's go and center it. Now let's go ahead and adjust the pivot because we want this to be set to the bottom. So now we can zero it again. So clearly this is not the right size. We're going to have to scale it up. First, let's go ahead and draw this back a bit so it doesn't intersect with any of the grass geometry. Let's turn this to shaded and let's get rid of the grid. Alright, so right about there. Oops. Right about there. What I'm going to actually do is, to make this a little more interesting, I'm going to copy this around a bit. And then do some resizing. Something like that. Bring one over here. Alright, I think that looks fairly interesting. Now, since we have this plane back here, which is going to act as our canvas by baking this grass onto it, let's go ahead and make sure this is placed correctly. First of all, we want it to be as close to the grass as possible without intersecting too much. Looks about perfect. So now, let's go ahead and create our cage, which should be very simple. All we have to do is drag this forward and bring it so it's not intersecting with the geometry. And so now xNormal, which is what I'm going to be using, will know to cast clear back from here two here, and this is actually intersecting a little bit. There we go. So this is our cage, and this is our low poly. I actually name these so I don't mix them up. And cage. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these three objects and I'm going to attach them to each other. And now I have one object, and I'm going to export this. And go to Foliage. HP underscore grass. Done. What I may actually do is convert this to an editable poly real quick. See, sometimes if you convert to an editable poly and it screws up, that means your bake will also screw up. But it looks good. Now let's go ahead and export our low poly. Low poly grass. That's fine. And we don't actually have to UV these. Since it's a perfect square, the UV space will take up every bit of it, so we don't actually need to UV it. I'll export LB is going to be our cage. Now I have xNormal here. Let's go ahead and bring in our meshes. High poly grass. Now let's bring in our low poly grass, and let's browse to an external cage. Cage. Okay. Now we will want a normal map. We will want an ambient occlusion map. Basically, we want as many maps as possible. Curvature, anything that can help us isolate sections of the bake to texture differently, we want. So cavity map would be good. Curvature map for the indented areas and the highlights. Normal map, obviously, and ambient occlusion. I would select more like a cavity map, but since this is a tutorial, I don't want to be spending forever waiting for a bake. I'm also going to bring this down to something like 2048. Always, always, always bake at least double the resolution that you think you'll be displaying at. That way, when you downscale it, it will do anti-aliasing on the edges. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a ray distance check, and then I will bake. But I'm going to go ahead and cut through that so you guys don't have to watch me the whole time doing this monotonous waiting. Welcome back. As you can see here, we have the issue, or the classic issue, of grass being too thin to get a clean bake. Basically, I had to bake out an 8K map to even get this clean of a normal and this clean of a occlusion map. So it's not an ideal situation. I would suggest, when making your own grass, make sure the grass is thick. Pretty thick, not too thick, not so thick that it doesn't look like your reference image, but make it thick enough that it bakes well, and also make it thick enough that when your texture down reses and MIPs, that it gets really, make sure it's clean, so when it mips down it doesn't break, because with this texture as is, I would never use this in a game engine, because first of all, it doesn't look great. Second of all, it's so thin that the textures would break. Like along here, it would actually become invisible because of how Unreal Engine mips things down. So you do not actually want to use blades that are that thin. Nonetheless, I will continue the tutorial with this grass because it can still illustrate my point accurately. So let us move on. What I would do at this point is I would create another layer and get a baseline color going for this grass. So let's go and change this to multiply. So now we have some basic color to the grass. So if I reduce the opacity of that, we can get some nice shading on the grass. And if we come over to our curvature, let's go ahead and bring this over to our occlusion layer. And gotta think of what I want to do with this layer here. Go ahead and select color range. Let's go and select the red if I can. There we go. Or actually, better yet, let's go to the red channel. And then Control A, Control C. And now let's go ahead and create another layer. Let's make it something like that. And let's change the hue to like maybe an orange. Let's go ahead and fill that layer with that color. Now what we're going to do is we are going to create a mask. And let's come back over here. Red, Control A, Control C. Go ahead and delete the layer mask. Let's try this again. Oh, I see. With the layer mask, you actually need to select like the white. So let's go ahead and select color range. Let's go ahead and select the black. And then Control Shift I to invert. And now we should be able to create our mask. Yeah, there we go. Let's go ahead and bring this stuff back in. There we go. Now we have some orange in here. And let's go ahead and create one more layer since we have still have one more color that we can use. Let's go ahead and sample that again, and let's go ahead and push it up to maybe more of a green. And let's come back over to here, channels, green channel. There's nothing in the blue channel. But let's go ahead and copy the green channel. Put in here, duplicate, paste, and let's go ahead and select color range black. Control Shift I. And now what we can do is create a layer mask, then come back over here and lost the green that I wanted. something like that. Bill. That doesn't look great. Let's get back a little bit. Looks a bit better. Make sure our ambient occlusion is on. And now we have some grass here. So at this point, we also have an alpha channel, so that's good. We can use this. Let's go and copy this. Bring it over because 3ds Max doesn't recognize alpha channels. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and save this. Call this B, or no, alpha. Okay, check that. I think the next thing I'm going to do is reduce the image size because it is taking a long time to save. There we go. Image size, as you can see, it's 8K. Let's see what 25% does. Pixels, yeah, that's okay. And now let's go ahead and save it. This will be D. Save. Now. There we go, alpha. So now our foliage is essentially done. Obviously you'll want to do a lot more work into the diffuse and roughness and fix any shading errors, which I'm not going to do because this is just a simple walkthrough. Now what we can do is we can pull this to the side, just create a copy. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to convert this to an editable poly, and I'm going to connect this, oops, Control C, there we go. Now we have a little bit of geometry here. Go to the material editor, and I'm going to grab a diffuse color, bitmap, stop backup, tutorials, oops, there we go, D, let's go ahead and go collapsed. And then what I'll want to do is go up, oops, go up, make sure the show shaded material and viewport is on. Now we need to do opacity, grab the bitmap, and alpha, collapsed. Perfect. So when we drag this material onto our object, there's our grass. Ideally, you want to fill up this entire space. It's obviously not filled up here. And it looks okay. Looks better than I thought it would look, but obviously a lot of the grass blades were way too thin to actually get a clean bake. Like you can see here, it kind of dithers off to nothing. You absolutely want to make sure that your grass blades are thick enough that this doesn't happen because it looks really ugly. You also want to do it and so when your texture mips down, it doesn't do this. So make sure those grass blades are thick. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to start editing the geometry to create little patches. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust these polys to fit this texture. And I'm going to go to preserve UVs, and so the texture doesn't stretch or anything when I move this. See how the texture doesn't do anything? So I'm just going to move this down. I'm going to move these down. Let's sort of try and get this as best as I can to fit the texture. Pull that in. Pull this in much further. Maybe even pull this out. And pull this in. Go. Alright, something like that. Now our grass is it's pretty much ready. Let's go ahead and maybe pull this all the way up here. Pull this down. No, that's not going to work. Never mind. Just sort of want to pull up all these a bit. Kind of want it to be a little square. And so what I can do is I can actually pull this out to deform the grass. So now you have your grass blades and your single mesh. Another thing you can do in 3ds Max is you can go to configure viewports, statistics, turn off polygon count, turn on triangle count, and total plus selection. And so now you get tris and verts instead, so you can keep an eye on your tri count for your grass mesh. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create maybe 3 different versions of this. So let's go ahead and start manipulating stuff. Something like that. Let's go ahead and create a copy. Do it the other way. Like that. You pull these top verts out more, and then create a copy. Then maybe bring these back, bring these forward. Something like that, so you have 3 different versions of the grass. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate this first. I'm going to bring these over here. And now I'm just going to grab one, copy it, bring it over. Grab one of these, bring it over. Now you can start intersecting geometry. Just kind of resizing it, just piecing it together. Create interesting grass patches. Alright, so now that's at 24 polys, or 24 triangles. That could be one grass patch. Create another, maybe a taller grass patch. Go. Obviously, you'd want more textures to go from. And when you're doing the baking process, what you can do is you can rotate your high poly 45 degrees. Then you can rotate it 45 degrees and do a new bake from that 45 degree location. Then you can do that 4 different times and you'll have 4 different textures from one single mesh. And they should all have a unique profile to them. So, I mean, you get a lot of bang for your buck there. As you can see, this grass looks okay. Had I have spent more time on the high poly, making it look right, making it look, thicker, and solving some of those issues before going into the baking process, I think it would look a lot better. And obviously, if I had spent a lot more time in the texturing process, it would also look better. But this is a basic overview on how to create grass, weeds, stuff of that nature quickly and efficiently. So I hope this helped you guys, and I will see you in the next one.